Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with Simone and Leesa this afternoon to talk about Bangladesh. Bangladesh is officially just over 50 years old. It became independent in 1971, arguably the only country in the world whose idea was formed around the idea of a language. So the Bangla of Bangladesh stands for the language Bangla, and Desh means land or country. And as an idea, it probably originated soon after the partition of what was India, ruled by the British. When the British left India, and little did they know that the Jaipur Literature Festival would be held here years later. When they left India, they also partitioned the country into two separate countries. India, the way it was, and the new country of Pakistan, partitioned along religious lines. And because the Muslim majority regions were carved off into Pakistan, there were actually two separate enclaves, one to the west of India and one nestled in the east, called West Pakistan and East Pakistan respectively. But other than religion, the two areas had very little in common. They had much more in common with their adjacent regions of what used to be India. And the people of East Pakistan were and are speakers of the Bangla language, which is also the language spoken in the part of India that I come from. At least I come from unofficially, because my roots also go back to the same part of the subcontinent that Leesa and Simone are from, which is East Bengal or Bangladesh. And soon after, in 1947, soon after the partition and the formation of Pakistan, a language movement began in East Pakistan, because the people there rightly wanted Bangla to be the language of everything, because that was the language of their lives. So they wanted administration and formal discourse to be in Bangla. But because power was concentrated in West Pakistan, Urdu was imposed as the language of governance. And the Bhasha movement, the revolution speaking up for Bangla, began in the early 1950s, leading to one particular horrific incident when thousands of young students and others who were speaking up for the right to use the Bangla language were massacred on 21st of February. And since then, 21 February, as it is called, is observed as International Mother Language Day all over the world. So that is the origin of Bangladesh, well before the liberation war actually began in the late 1960s and early 70s, leading to the formal independence in 1971. And there is probably no family that lives in Bangladesh today whose members or generations from whom have not been involved in the freedom movement in one way or another. The 160 million population of Bangladesh is full of people, all of whom can remember back through generational memory, through the memory of a single generation, to the freedom, to the battle of liberation, the Mukti Juddho as it was called. So I'm going to start today by asking both Simone and Leesa to talk about your family memories and their participation in the liberation war.
Go ahead, Leesa.
I grew up hearing stories about liberation war of Bangladesh from my father, Muhammad Lutfur Rahman. He was a freedom fighter. He joined the war and as a general administrator in Sector 11. So I cherish so many stories that I heard from him, like a boy, a faceless, nameless boy who died on the eve of the Independence Day, the 16th of December. And when he was told the news, there's a peaceful smile emerged on his lips, as my father would say to me. And that story actually stayed with me, and that nameless boy, the face of that nameless boy, represents millions of people and freedom fighters who gave their lives for the birth of our country and for our freedom. So there are other stories as well, like the Barangano Women. When I turned 17 years old, my father first told me about these women. He told me that he had witnessed women and girls, hundreds of women and girls standing back to back on a convoy of trucks, like a like sacrificial animals. That image of Barangano women, sexual violence survivors, never left me. They were actually rescued from the army barracks and rape camps when my father saw them. So that stayed with me forever. I wanted to know them. I wanted to really know them, because if you think about it, a systematic campaign of genocide and rape, mass rape, took place during the liberation war of Bangladesh by the Pakistani army and their local collaborators. And so you should be able to see them all around, if the number is that big. But there was no one I met and I was really wanted to meet them. Then finally in 2010 I met 21 Barangano women in a small city near Dhaka, and from then on my life changed.
Yes, we'll talk about
Totally,
your great project of that. Do you want to give a little background to the story of the history of Biranganas, because not everybody may know what actually happened?
Barangano women, in Bengali, Barangana means brave woman. And this was the honorific that was granted to all the victims and survivors of mass rape during the liberation of war of Bangladesh by the interim government only 6 days after the war ended. I think this is until now unprecedented. Being a conservative Muslim country, Bangladesh recognized these women. But even then, what happened, these women were shunned for decades by a society where rape is considered as a source of shame for the victims, but not for the perpetrators. These women are all over the country. It was indiscriminate, and it didn't matter who those women were. They were from girls, and also we do not talk about that very often, but which was really fact that many young boys were subjected to torture and rape as well. And there are many types of rape that took place in Bangladesh. It could be spot rape, it could be women following the troops as slave, sex slaves. It could be they were incarcerated in rape camps and army barracks, and so it happened throughout the 9 months of the war.
It's a memory of trauma. It's not
Absolutely.
something that's forgotten, or in fact probably should be forgotten. We shouldn't forget either that the Bangladesh Liberation War was fought on the side of the Bengalis by untrained people. There was no army. It was guerrilla fighters, young men and women who just rose up and said that we are going to free our country no matter what. And thousands lost their lives in the process. They were not trained. They managed to get arms, but they eventually succeeded. Sorry?
Millions lost
yes,
their
millions
lives.
lost their lives. And well, they eventually succeeded. It was a hard-fought independence, but it was fought on the sacrifices of millions, as you said, women and men in many different ways. And we've just heard the story of the sacrifices that women had to make for this. Simone, your family also has strong memories of the Liberation War, which have come down to you.
Yes, thank you, Arunava. I myself was 5, so I have a very limited memory of 71, obviously, but I do remember yelling out Joy Bangla on the London streets after we'd escaped here. And I remember having the red paint that was representing what was taking place in Bangladesh. So I thought I'd just bring some words of my mother, who is actually sitting here. Leesa and I both know that she should be the one sitting here, really, but she can't talk. But just to set another bit of context, a lot of our memories really are not just of 71, but the lead up to 71, and many stories, starting with the partition in 47, and from my perspective, my family moving very traumatically from Calcutta to Dhaka, then the 52 language movement, and friends of my father. They were all in Dhaka University, which was a really hotbed of political protest and where a lot of the massacres took place. And then many other events that are symbolic of the repression of East Pakistan, including the Bola cyclone in '69, which was the worst cyclone ever that hit. I don't believe it's been superseded, and it was a pure neglect of all the victims from the center in West Pakistan and East Pakistan. So there was a lot of emotion and anger that I've heard family members express. Many very personally were involved. My father was involved in the Bola cyclone relief, and that's how BRAC developed. So the history of the lead up to 71 is also very much part of our memory bank. And it's the one thing that is quite interesting, I don't know if you found this, Leesa, is that getting people to talk about the liberation war is very difficult. I have uncles who are very central to it, but who were freedom fighters, who all they say is that we were next to rickshawalas, professors, engineers, bricklayers, and they all felt very, very much part of a movement, but they would never give the detail, and only much later is it coming out slowly. I mean, the mass rape issues are just literally coming out in the last few years. But in any case, let me just read a little. It's a very personal story of my mother's, but on the day that the war started, it's March 71. It was just past midnight. Your Baba and I had been at a party at your Uncle Aksad's, the usual 1960s grouping, arguing about politics and how to change the world. It was a very 60s, civil society was very strong in Dhaka. As we turned the bend at the cantonment, we saw what must have been the first tanks roll into Dhaka. The sight was eerie and ominous, and I felt nauseous, just wanting to get back to my children. The next day, we heard of the killing spree at the university. So many of our friends shot dead. I can still feel the deep sorrow and anger. Your Baba went into hiding, given his history, including being on the defense team for the Agartala case. It was a wait-and-see scenario before I would flee with you three to London, Kishon not even a year old. A few days in, I do remember having visceral memories of being caught up in the Hindu-Muslim riots of '64, and my immediate thoughts were for the Hindu potters in the little Rai Bazaar of Shatmujis Road. It is where they lived with their families. Although then we didn't know the full extent of the horrors that would unfold in initial massacre of Hindus countrywide, I knew the Pakistani army wouldn't spare them. Perhaps naively, I left you all with your Aya and your Babuchi and drove in with my VW Beetle to Raya Bazaar. Many had fled. Those left looked ashen and helpless. Some eagerly accepted my offer to take the women and children to safety, and they piled into the Beetle. I made several trips and housed them in our home. They only stayed a few days, and then their husbands and fathers arrived to fetch them to flee Dhaka. Only now on reflection do I realize that I could have been stopped in the car or those hidden in my home discovered. But at the time, even with little children of my own, the human instinct to protect other mothers dominated, and so many have said the same. And a common humanity prevailed. Days later, my aunt, whose house shares the Raya Bazaar wall, said she heard women screaming and being raped.
It's the kind of personal valor that the people of Bangladesh and before that East Pakistan that they demonstrated, probably unmatched in many parts of the world. What are the other aspects of the liberation war that have stayed with you and that have been reflected in your work? Question to both of you.
I think there's so many aspects, actually. One lives those memories and incorporates them. I would say that the one aspect that probably has informed my work is the notion of bottom-up power and how important that is. I often quote somebody called Margaret Mead, who said, and I'm probably misquoting her, but that never let a small group of citizens not feel they can do something that changes the world. They are the only ones that have ever done so. And I do feel that Bangladesh was very much about committed citizens. So my work, I ended up in Bangladesh working with BRAC, which is very much about empowering the poor. And it then became a global trailblazer. In Bangladesh, this one organization is now the global leading organization and an NGO that deals with poverty alleviation and actually is making an impact on extreme poverty in a way that was unheard of before. And now has led to the SDG being to actually overcome extreme poverty in 2030. And I then ended up in South Africa working just before Mandela came to power. And I think part of that was very much driven by a sense that change can take place and people can make change, and that also reinforced that. And today, now, I think more than any time, I want to believe that we can still change what's happening around the world. And the other key issue for me is, I suppose, being a humanist, rather than my identity is very much about values rather than specifically what religion I am, even whether I'm Bangladeshi or Bengali or Brit-Bengali or that sort of definition, but it's really about a value system, which is secular.
Leesa, we'll talk about rising silence, of course.
Thank you. I was thinking when Simone, you were saying that when we were growing up, freedom fighters and people who joined the freedom fighting liberation war of Bangladesh, they wouldn't speak about that much. There's a reason. When I can say that I was the first generation of a newborn nation, and while we were growing up, our textbooks, the history of our liberation war was like that. It used to be like that. In 1971, we fought against the perpetrator, Hanadar Bahini. Who those perpetrators were, we were not allowed to know. We were not allowed to mention the Pakistani army. We were not allowed to mention Razakar collaborators. And we were not allowed to mention any truth about the war. I saw 2 military coups, and with the change of the regime, our history book used to change, and the people suffered ridicule, harassment, and they were even killed for being freedom fighters, because they were represented an ideal that had a vast popular resonance, which the authority wanted to stamp out. Even the name of our founding leader, Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, were not mentioned in the textbook. Every attempt was made to erase his name from the public memory. So we can only imagine what Barangano women had to go through. And as far as the world is concerned, 1971 is a forgotten genocide. So the plight of the Barangano women stood little chance of being acknowledged. My journey started to know the Barangano women when I first heard from my father, and at that point in time, I couldn't picture their faces, because it was overshadowed by the sheer number and this honorific title that actually proved to be a burden to them, because that was the point of kind of finger, pointing at them that she is going Barangano woman. And Barangana, then society made them Barangana. It's a 2 Bengali word. One is Barangana, means brave woman. Barangana means sex worker. So that connotation never left them. So I really wanted to know them, and all my life, the focal point of my work has always been, around Bangladesh and its bloody freedom struggle and my unquestioning passion around it, which was obviously instilled in me by my father. And so very naturally, very organically, history of Bangladesh and how it formed, kind of make my what I do right now. Whether I want to tell stories through theater or film, somehow it kind of embraces that history of me, because if we think about it, the survivors of Bangladesh, Barangano Women of Bangladesh, is my identity and they are my legacy, and I told you about that that after I met them and walked with them and spent times with them, stayed with them for weeks and months. It literally changed my life and my perspective, the way I look at life. I know now what I'm capable of as a woman, and the dignity and love and courage they showed to me. It's so profound. It's so uplifting. That's what made my path quite definite for me.
Would you like to talk to us about your project, your Rising Silence project?
So I met these Barangano women, first 21 Barangano women in a shelter near Dhaka. And I still remember the first time I met them, and they were talking. They're sharing their stories, and I was crying like anything. And they were like, "Would you mind a glass of water? Can I fetch you a glass of water?" And the strength they showed is unbelievable. But every time, whenever they kind of shared their stories in terms of what happened to them, what had they gone through, the tortures and brutality, they were very strong, very strong. They can say it with straight face. But every time they break down when they talk about their children, when they talk about the children they lost, the parents were killed. So I met them. I don't know why. Maybe I know why. I took a small camera crew with me the first time I met them, with their permission, of course, and took their accounts, came back to the UK, and a year or so passed when I heard the inevitable, that the women I met, one of them died. It hit me hard, really hard. Sorry. I still get so emotional. I'm so sorry.
Take a moment.
So it really hit me hard. I kept on watching her accounts. I didn't want to forget her name. Her name was Bahatun, and maybe because I have been looking for them, without even realizing it, since I was 17, and I thought that there must be many like me who want to know them, and then that compelled me to take my arts organization Kamala Collective back to Bangladesh and do a research and development theatrical piece called Barangano Women of War, based on their stories. And after they watched their own stories on stage, they said, "Go and tell the world." And while we were touring the play Barangano Women of War in the UK nationally, and later in Bangladesh in 2014, the women I met were leaving one by one. And I felt the urgency to safeguard their stories as a more permanent record. And that's how the Rising Silence, a documentary feature film that follows nine survivors in their own homes, in their own locality, and in their own surroundings, in their own elements, because that's what I wanted to show. I wanted to show and wanted to know them beyond labels and statistics. I wanted to show that that this woman is someone's daughter or wife or sister or mother or a lover or any woman, and I wanted to see them on their own own terms, because if you think about it, and that's my experience with them, that yes, I mean, horrible things happen to them, but that is not them. Yes, they were raped. Yes, they were tortured. Yes, they had gone through unimaginable brutality and sufferings, but that does not define them. And the way they they rose up from the ashes is just, it shows that what we are capable of as human beings. We sometimes don't know our own power until we are tested, and their lives is a living proof of that. And still going through that kind of brutality, holding on to the humanity like that, is, I have not experienced in my entire life. I don't know, I think I'm...
Arunava, may I ask
Absolutely,
a question
absolutely.
through you? Leesa, I mean, the individual stories are heart-wrenching. I'm quite keen to understand something that I felt I got through your work, which was, use of rape as a sort of war machinery, and how conscious the army was to implement it as a strategy.
I mean, Bangladesh, Liberation War of Bangladesh remains one of the first recorded cases where rape used as a weapon of war in the 20th century. I mean, mass rape during wartime is not a new phenomenon. But what is unique to the Liberation War of Bangladesh was, according to Brown Miller, that the international community for the first time recognized that the systematic use of rape could be one of the strategies to terrorize the people. So Bangladesh is one of the first recorded cases, and in terms of how the world react to that, I mean, during the Liberation War, the UN's main focus on to the Indian intervention rather than the humanitarian crisis that was faced by the people of then East Pakistan. Interesting point, Simone, that I would like to say it because that shows the attitude of the world towards the survivors. I do not want to quote wrong, so I want to say, So I asked the United Nations Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict, Ms. Pramila Patton, that how come none of her reports on conflict-related sexual violence ever included Bangladesh, and why UN has failed to acknowledge and recognize the genocide and the mass rapes that took place in the Liberation War of Bangladesh by the Pakistan Army. And her responses were deflective, evasive, and very disappointing. Deflective in a way, she didn't respond to my answer at all. She actually asked me that, what did Bangladesh do for these women? And I said, what Bangladesh did for these women, no country ever did this. This is unprecedented. The 6 days after the war ended, Bangladesh recognized these women. And in 2019, Adama Dieng, I do not want to misquote him. I want to actually quote him, that Adama Dieng, the UN Secretary General's Special Advisor on the Prevention of Genocide, visited Dhaka in March 2019 and assured Bangladeshi Prime Minister to raise the issue at UN. And he said, though some country may oppose, we will raise the issue of Pakistani genocide in Bangladesh during the Liberation War in the interim forum. So I mean, I don't know how you feel about that statement, but it reveals the attitude of the political leaders and the world leaders, that even after 50 years, they are denied. They are more worried about the countries who may oppose to acknowledge these atrocities, these pain of these women and pain of the families of the martyred. They're more worried about that than acknowledging that fact. To say, yes, I see you suffering, I know what happened to you. That's what they want, and it's so important to them. Just one thing a Rwandan survivor told me, because we actually meet at the Global Survivors Network organized by the Mukwege Foundation at The Hague, and we were fortunate to take our two of our survivors there, and survivors from all over the world come there for a retreat, and they share their experiences and their stories to one another. So it's a Rwandan survivor, her name is Christine. She told me that open your ears and listen to what we have to say. When we know someone is listening, that gives us the most comfort. Just to be acknowledged. That is the world is failing to do. That breaks my heart.
Yes.
Arunava, just to add to that very briefly, that I think that just having lived through South Africa during that 10 years and seeing the Truth and Reconciliation process, which was spearheaded by the late Desmond Tutu, Bishop Tutu, it had such a profound effect on healing the nation. And it's not a wishy-washy thing. It really was very hardcore. Sometimes the media portrayed the sort of more, the stories that were good to sort of illustrate, torture and victims actually coming to terms with it. But actually, there was sort of a huge amount of this sort of cathartic process taking place, and that really hasn't happened properly in Bangladesh ever, which explains a lot of the problems that we have in the country, decade after decade. And this is not, it's not that necessarily only the international bodies have responsibility for this, but even internally, just having processes and really thinking through post-conflict reconciliation. It's very nascent in Bangladesh and nascent in a lot of the world, actually. And I think there's a lesson or two from South Africa, which everyone predicted there was going to be a bloodbath, and there wasn't. Notwithstanding what happened afterwards with Zuma, etc., and Thabo Mbeki. But nevertheless, that the bloodbath didn't happen, and you don't have the level of sheer anger that's residual still. Even now, when we have meetings on Bangladesh 71, fights will break out. And this is 50 years ago. Physical fights will break out in a room. And I think there's a lot to be said, which is symbolic of what you're saying, Leesa.
There's a lot to deal with. I mean, not many countries in the world would have owed as much to their independence as Bangladesh did to Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who was called Bangabandhu, the father of the nation. And he was assassinated 4 years after independence on 15th of August 1975, when members of the army broke into his house and shot him and his family. Most of the members of his family were shot dead in the early hours of the morning. And that's another aspect of Bangladesh's history that has not quite been, I don't think anyone dealt with or reconciled to it in any manner. And yet, Simone, despite all this, Bangladesh is an economic success story today on its own terms. Do you want to talk to us about that? I know I'm switching gears, but it's very much a part of the realities of Bangladesh.
Yes, I need to adjust to switching gears. It is an incredible story. In 71, Bangladesh was deemed a basket case. We had unprecedented child mortality, maternal mortality. It was, I think, really bottom 5 in the sort of GDP levels, even below sub-Saharan Africa, I think. it's now entering into a middle income country. Sort of on sort of basic human development indices, you have gender parity. More girls go to school than boys. You have, I think, Bangladesh, this little country, is leading in South Asia in terms of all the health indicators, almost all of them except nutrition. It's the single fastest growing economy in South Asia and one of the fastest growing economies in the world. And you feel that prolific sort of activity on the street. My work involves oversight of the garment industry, and after the Rana Plaza disaster, and just having sort of seen how fast that industry has grown. It's now the second to China as the second largest exporter of garments to the world, and this little country is doing that. Of course, we all know that there's an issue behind that. There's a positive story about this growth, and women now in the workforce, girls outside on the street, everyone looks you in the eye. They're the economic agents in their home. At that point, sort of, the power in the household has increased, but with it comes sort of all the issues we know, which led to Rana Plaza. So it's a bittersweet story for me. I think it's remarkable, but we still have a global industry that is dependent on cheap labor, and that poses a huge problem around understanding why that and how that growth has taken place. And I think one does need to look beneath the surface. But on the sort of human development side, I think there's a really truly profound story to look into. Why is it that Bangladesh's health indicators have been so phenomenal? And part of that story, actually, ironically, is the sorts of governments we've had, irrespective of the sort of increasingly undemocratic nature of governments, successive governments. They have allowed an incredible plethora of NGOs to work in partnership with them. And if you read the Lancet, if you're interested in read the Lancet report, which is a heavy-duty academic health publication, they have attributed that to, in fact, allowing these organizations to work with a lot of freedom. And that actually flips also to the literature side, which is
Yes.
why we're here. You have an incredibly vibrant literature festival in Bangladesh, which allows
Yes.
the sort of freedom of speech that you don't see in broader society. And we have an incredible civil society in Bangladesh, and there's a history of that, which is now being challenged right now in the last few years. So there is an issue around how to preserve that. And flipping back to what we were talking about, some of the lessons of the freedom and liberation war, it is that people can fight that. And they are doing it in their own way. I was invited to not invited to, a friend of mine I spoke to her yesterday, and she said she was invited to a queer book launch. It was under the radar, but in Bangladesh, where you know what has happened to bloggers. Yes. So there's a vibrant civil society that is still very much a part of Bangladesh's identity, even though you have people like Shahidul Alam, who was imprisoned, and huge human rights violations, extrajudicial killings. These issues remain very, very important to fight, but there is this civil society that will fight it.
Yes. I mean, the battle between civil society and those who want to oppress freedom of thought is rampant across South Asia. It's not just a phenomenon in Bangladesh.
Absolutely. Not just South Asia.
Well, yeah, but I'm just thinking, of course, but I'm specifically thinking South Asia because, because we think that history moves in one direction, but clearly it doesn't. The arrow is kind of bending backwards in many ways. But since you talk about literature, and the fact that literature is very vibrant in Bangladesh, it's got one of the most active writing and reading cultures that I'm familiar with in any country in the world. And very interestingly, Leesa is one of them. She's a writer herself. Besides the theatre work that she does, she's written fiction, and there's a good opportunity for us to ask you to read from your novel, if you'd like to do that for us.
I'd love to do that,
and
but
also
I
tell us
write
a
in
little bit about
Bangla.
and also tell us a little bit about Riots, translated into English as Hellfire by
Shabnam Nadia,
who herself is from Bangladesh.
And a brilliant writer and a
brilliant
translator,
writer
and
and
I'm actually missing
And a very
Nadia
dear
so
friend and
much,
should have been here.
I just have to need to tell that I write in Bangla, and it's a novel in Bangla. So what I will do is I will read a paragraph in Bangla, then move on to English for everyone's benefit. Rourab Hellfire is about Farida, a mother, and her two daughters, Lovely and Beauty. The novel opens the day Lovely turns 40, and her mother Farida, lets her go out for the very first time, completely unchaperoned, to buy some fabric. And we also come to know that there is a man inside her head who, and he reminds Lovely to buy a knife when she arrives at the market, and he also encourages to roam around the city and to go to a Central Park, a dodgy place, where she meets a man in a red muffler. And he propositions her, and the excerpt I'm going to read now will follow their conversation. আমাকে নিয়ে চিন্তা করবেন না, আপনারা দুজন আগে কথা শেষ করেন, আমার কোনো তাড়াহুড়া নাই। আমি কারোর সাথে কথা বলতেছি না। আপনার ভিতরের মাথার ভিতরের লোকটার নাম কি? নাম নাই। নাম নাই? নাম নাই। আপনি একটা নাম দিয়ে দেন। আমার মাথার ভিতরে কেউ নাই। লাভলির চোখে পানি চলে এলো। কোথা থেকে কেন তার হদিস ওর জানা নাই। ওর মনে হলো লাল মাফলার ওর সাথে ইয়ার্কি মারছে। পাগলের পিছনে বাচ্চারা যেভাবে পাগলি পাগলি বলে দৌড়ায়, সেই একই নিষ্ঠুরতায়। বাচ্চারা যদিও টের পায় না কতটা নিষ্ঠুর তারা হচ্ছে, কিন্তু লাল মাফলার কি পায়? Thank you. This is Nadia's translation. I'm really missing her now. Don't worry about me, Red Muffler's guy said. You two go ahead and finish your conversation. I'm in no hurry. I'm not talking to anyone. What's the name of the man inside your head? He has no name. No name? No name. You should give him a name. There's no one inside my head. Lovely's eyes teared up. She had no clue where the tears came from and why. She felt like Red Muffler guy was mocking her with the same cruelty that drove children to chase a mad woman with taunts of freak, freak. Children didn't understand how cruel they could be. Did he understand? Okay, I'm going to go and pick up a couple of cigarettes. In the meantime, the two of you can decide whether you want to come with me or not. No pressure. You only come if it makes you happy. The young man stood up, and Lovely immediately became certain that he wasn't coming back. She felt a desperate desire to say, yes, I'll go. I don't have to talk it over with anyone. I'll go. But inevitably, she didn't. When had her desires ever borne fruit? Red Muffler guy vanished into the trees of Romna Park with long strides. The man inside Lovely's head had been burning to talk for a while and couldn't hold himself back any longer. Apumoni, how long can you make do with just your fingers? I know you are itching to go there. You've never known what love is. Now that you have this one chance, explore it with your heart. with your body. I've never known what love is. How could you say that? My heart still burns. Sorry, Apumoni. I'm sorry. I'm wrong. Of course you know. But physical love? You'll spend an entire lifetime and then die one day, but you will never know what physical love is. What the hell is that? Just think that the Creator Himself has handed you this one chance. Tawbah, tawbah, shame. No, no. I could never do something like that. You've egged me on to do many shameful things. Amma, screw your Amma. Who gives a shit about Amma here, huh? I have egged you on to do many shameful things. Is that fair? Was I the one who brought you all that porn by Roshamai Gupta? All I said was, put your fingers to good use. But Apumoni, can buttermilk sate the thirst for milk? That's why I was saying, let's go. I always knew I shouldn't talk to you, that it would land me in trouble someday, big trouble. Then what's the point in wasting time here? Let's just go home. Amma isn't going to ask you anything today anyway. She's going to feed you well like a sacrificial cow, send you to your room, and then quietly just lock you in. Then the two of us can take our time figuring out what to tell her. So, what is your name? He was asking. Who's he? Oh, I see. Tell him I have no name. That's what I said. I turned 40 today. 40 years old. Imagine that. You're right. I'm going to go with him. I'll clasp his hand and say, take me with you. I want to know just once what it feels like. So do I. Although fingers aren't half bad. Apumoni, do you remember the first time? You, the bed, the room, everything just shook and shimmered. Yes, Lovely remembered. She remembered all of it. She blushed a deep red in shame, in shyness, in pleasure. This world made red by red. Oh, mother, your babe has been killed by the killer.
Thank you. Before we turn to questions, there's actually one more person I was really keen if she could have joined us today. That's the singer Shohini Alam. I don't know if she's here, but with your permission, I'm going to play a very short snatch. Unfortunately, none of us can sing.
No.
Otherwise, we would have tried to perform ourselves. But I'm going to play a very short snatch from her rendition of the Bangladesh national anthem. Can you hear?
Matur mukhir bani
Thank you. Questions, please. We are open for questions.
Can I say one thing? I'm so sorry. I didn't mean all of you to stand up. I just stood
No.
myself. Sorry about that.
But also,
Yes.
Arunava,
Do we have a mic, please?
Arunava, just before you continue, I think it would be useful for everyone to know that that is the national anthem of
Yes,
Bangladesh.
yes. I mentioned
But
that, yes.
Bengalis know that. But also, Rabindranath Tagore wrote it, and he wrote the national anthem of India, and I think that's quite symbolic. The
Well,
same.
yes.
Is
Of course,
that not right?
He didn't
not?
write them to be national
Anthem,
anthems.
yeah.
Right,
But
no,
they were
of course.
chosen
Yeah.
as national anthems. Yes. Yes, the gentleman in the third row, and then the gentleman in the first row, and the lady next to her.
Hello. One statement you made in the beginning, I just wanted to correct it. In 1952, language movement, I was 12 years old school student, and I was present where the firing took place. I was watching from the safety of the then Medical College hostel, and the minister's cars and were passing by. And we had come out of this our classes in the morning and going towards the assembly. At that time, firing took place. Thousands did not die. Only 5 people died. Question is not how many people died. It was a symbolic, and that was the history-changing event. Because before that, there was tug of war between the older generation who fought for Pakistan and younger generation like us, whose memory of Pakistan, although it was only 5 years back, was deep. So at that point, I think before 21st February 52, if there was a referendum, 70% would have voted for Urdu to be national, like my father and my father's generation. But from that day onwards, it changed. Because when they saw, the grown-up people saw that the children, what they're doing, and they would convince them that we have overcome one colonialism, another colonialism coming, which will be worse than before. And that is the point they realized this. And things changed from then, and it went up to 71. And in 71 also I was present in Chittagong. So I saw whole process, how it went. But it's not question of numbers. Of course. It's a question of how things changed. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It's so wonderful to have a person who was part of everything. Thank you very much, sir. Yes.
Hello, thank you for the excellent talk. Just 2 quick questions. One, you touched on it earlier in your talk, about why there isn't such a remembrance or discussion, or there's a sort of collective amnesia almost about the independence movement, and whether, as you mentioned, one of the questions, is there a sort of a collective trauma that you think that's contributing to it, or is it just because of the way education and it was sort of covered up in Bangladesh? The other question is on sort of language and its relationship to Bangladesh. So I work as a doctor in the NHS, and I also work as an examiner, examining foreign doctors who come to work in the NHS. What I've noticed in the last sort of 3-4 years, the number of Bangladeshi doctors has increased quite a lot. I discussed this with my friend's dad. His father was a freedom fighter in Brindaban College during the independence movement. And he told me sort of years ago that many people don't come is because there's this nationalistic aspect to the Bangladeshi language. And English wasn't spoken as much because it sort of seemed as a sort of after we went through so much for the language movement, that seems, so Bangladesh was held onto and it's been taught, and English wasn't used as much, but that seems to be changing now. There's many more Bangladeshi doctors, which I've noticed coming through. And I wonder whether the relationship with language in Bangladesh has changed or is changing.
Okay, I gather there are 3 questions, right? I mean, what you said about intergenerational trauma or PTSD. Yes, that is one factor, but that is not the reason they didn't speak up. The reason they never could tell their stories because we, as a society, we could not give them a safe space. We always say that 70% of the survivors were taken back into their homes and society. Yes, they have been, which was amazing, but as long as they don't talk about it. That is not accepting, is it? So we never gave them that space, and also the political environment after 75 was very, very stifling and dangerous. They couldn't talk about what happened to them. They would have been killed. And also, after the 15th of December, all women's centers, rehabilitation centers where survivors stayed locked up overnight, and they were thrown into streets overnight. Documents were destroyed to erase the evidence of their existence. So that went on for 2 decades, from 75, 1.5 decades. And from the 90s, beginning of the 90s, people started to talk about it, and there were less danger to talk about it. But before then, it was a life-threatening thing to talk about, what happened to them. And you were talking about trauma. Trauma is I have met 83 survivors all across Bangladesh, and I found out that they have been dealing with physical trauma, emotional trauma, societal trauma, societal trauma of stigma and prejudice, and that trauma affects not only them but to their children and their grandchildren. It's like an intergenerational trauma. And what happens with war, when we think a war ends, it never ends there. Never. The everlasting impact that goes on from family to family, to generation, granddaughter of a Barangano woman. I have very close relationship with her. Her name is Jonatha. I love her name. Jonatha meaning pupil. She told me that sometimes she wakes up at night fearing things, and this trauma is so. It's such a thing that our survivors have been living with this unbearable burden, and the ongoing impact of it still burns, and without the slightest warning, it reveals itself. Like once I was filming my film Rising Silence, and suddenly Shurjapa, one of the survivors I was interviewing, she stopped and she just looked, she fixed her gaze, and she's like, "Can you say that? They're coming. I can hear their sound of their boots." "Oh, you can't see them, but I can see them." It just, I was so puzzled, but to follow her, the trajectory of her gaze, you can feel that she's seeing it. And again, another time, we took 2 Barangano women to attend a Global Survivors Retreat at The Hague. So we were going to our hotel, and at the doorstep, Javeda Appa, one of the survivors from Bangladesh, she stopped and she looks at me and she says, "What, someone breaks in and tortures us?" So you can see, and that actually a startling reminder that how human body and mind carry traumas for decades, and how without any warning it can come forth. But one beautiful thing I saw, that my question was, I don't have time.
Yeah, we're out of time.
Yeah, don't have time. So I think that we can extend our conversation outside. Thank you so much for your question.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you very much. Thank you, Simone and Leesa.